Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us, and we will get our panel, The Artist's New Tools, Art, Code, and Generative Systems, started. For those who don't know, my name is Adam Levine. I am the Edward Drummond and Florence Scott Libby Director here at the Toledo Museum of Art, and I am honored to be facilitating this panel. But it is important to say at the outset that I am facilitating not because I have any great expertise on this topic, but because the remarkable curator of this exhibition, Julia Kagansky, gave birth on the 5th of July. So she is not available, and we not only respect, but we applaud her priorities, right? Round of applause for Julia. But we are gonna run for about 50 minutes. Maybe we'll flex into 60 minutes. We are not going to have an open public Q&A because the artists, whom I'll introduce in just a minute, will be in the exhibition during my tours later on, and it would be, I think, much more productive and engaging for you to be able to ask questions directly to them in the space in front of their work. So we're not going to do an open Q&A, and that also gives us more opportunity for them to speak, because this is a very exciting exhibition for us, but it is certainly the first exhibition of its kind here at the Toledo Museum of Art, and the first exhibition, therefore, for this audience and the first introduction to this material. So my job, in addition to asking some questions, is to frame the panel at the outset. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to talk probably for 5 to 7 minutes, and I'm going to explain a few things about the show. I'm going to explain what the panel is today, what the panel isn't today, and then I'm going to introduce the artists, and we will be on our way. Before doing that, though, I do want to also acknowledge that exhibitions like these are only made possible by incredible sponsors. Toledo is a small community, so when you see the people or people who work for the companies mentioned, please thank them, because to be private and to be free is a remarkably difficult thing to be. So to do exhibitions like this requires incredible support. So our exhibition season sponsors are Susan and Tom Palmer. The presenting sponsor for this exhibition is the Taylor Automotive family, and we have additional support from the Ohio Arts Council, from Dana Incorporated, from Black Dove, which is not a local company, and from Mark Bevington. So please give them a round of applause and thank any of those folks who you know when you see them. So this is not the first exhibition on this topic. The first exhibition that seriously engaged with the notions that you're going to find in this exhibition was in 1968 in London, and it's an iconic exhibition that was called Cybernetic Serendipity. And cybernetics, right, is a field that really developed about 20 years earlier, and not surprisingly, artists started thinking about a new concept. Artists started experimenting with new technologies. This is what artists do. And it is important, therefore, for those of you who read the article in The Blade, to not think about this exhibition as the Toledo Museum of Art doing something new. It is, as I said, an introduction of a new medium. But actually the trend over the past 125 years is that the Toledo Museum of Art introduces the Toledo area to new things, right? The newness is the trend, because what is remarkable about this museum, as we sit in a gallery with Baroque masterworks, is that we don't have a contemporary art museum. So it is the obligation of this institution to do Rachel Royce exhibitions and to do exhibitions of contemporary artists. It is so in our DNA that I will remind everyone that the Impressionist paintings that everyone loves so much were collected when they were contemporary artworks, right? That was contemporary art once. All work was contemporary once. The Rubens was contemporary at the time it was painted in the 17th century. And over time, as a function of technology, artists' media change. It is totally normal for you to walk into our Africa Unmasked exhibition and see Ida Molina's magnificent photography and think, ah yes, I'm used to seeing things like this in a museum. But photography, spoiler alert, is a relatively recent invention in the history of the world, in the history of civilization. Technology becomes assimilated into artistic practice and becomes normalized with greater exposure. This exhibition is an important step forward, not just for our audience, but for museums in achieving just that. It, as you will see if you have not already, not only stands up to the quality standard that you expect from the Toledo Museum of Art and Display, but also stands up to the quality standard that you expect in the artwork itself. It is a magnificent show. All of the makers and artists represented in the show produced remarkable work. It is a privilege to be joined by 3 of them today. I will introduce them momentarily, but I do just want to say 2 more things about the panel. This is a panel in which we're going to discuss generative art. So let me level set and explain at a very high level what generative art is. Generative art is art which is about process as much as it is about product, right? It is about creating a system, and a very intentionally designed system that also allows for a range of outcomes, okay? It is about thinking about process and building a process that creates visual outputs, but allows the process itself to generate a range of outputs. And there is incredible intentionality, as you will see, and incredible craft that goes into formulating that process. One way for you to think of that, to think back to our Impressionist painting example, is both Monet and Cézanne were Impressionists, or thinking about similar questions, but we would call them both Impressionists today. And yet you can look at a Monet and know it's a Monet, even though every Monet is different. And you could look at a Cézanne and know that it's a Cézanne, even though every Cézanne is different. There were variable outcomes within a similar style. That is a way to think about what generative art is. Generative art is defining a style, to use a traditional art historical term, but can have an infinite array of outcomes. Monet was optimizing on how the paint was applied to the canvas. These artists are optimizing on the variation that can be produced from a particular type of style. That is not exactly precise, but it is a good metaphor to guide you as you think through what we're going to be unpacking here today. What this panel is not, it is not a discussion on generative AI. It is not a conversation around whether ChatGPT has scraped the entire world's worth of data, right? Because these artists have designed their own code, they've created their own databases, they've trained it. This is a very different conversation. This is artistic intentionality, and you are going to be, I think, amazed by the level of detail, sophistication, and quality that has gone into these works, and that has resulted in the remarkable things that you'll see on display after the panel. So that's what the panel is. It's what the panel isn't. And with that, I'm going to recede into the background, except for the questions I'm going to ask, and introduce our artists and turn it over to them to talk about their work. So I'm joined from furthest away to nearest by Casey REAS, who's an artist and professor at the University of California in Los Angeles, although he is from Troy, Ohio, woohoo, where he co-directs social software. REAS's software, prints, and installations have been featured in numerous solo and group exhibitions. His work is included in private and public collections, including the Centre Pompidou, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and the Whitney Museum of American Art, among many others. He is the co-founder of Feralfile Processing and the Processing Foundation, and the author of books, including Compressed Cinema and Form and Code in Design and Art and Architecture. REAS holds a master's in Media and Arts and Sciences from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Round of applause for Casey. Please welcome him to Toledo. Next to him is Sam Spratt, who creates from rupture, the pursuit of redemption through solidity to chart a path forward from past missteps. His current body of work, a series of digital paintings, Lucy follows the infinite story of pilgrimage and serves as a refracted self-portrait of the artist. Each piece, a confession, a conversation, and a joke at our expense. Through the process of palingenesis, this episodic body of work serves as a guide and warnings for the atomized individual exiting collectors participate in the works themselves. His work, The Masquerade, is the most iconographically different and is a fascinating gesture towards the future of generative art. Please join me in welcoming Sam. And Dejha Ti is one half of the artist duo Operator, whose collaborative practice with Anya Catherine develops critical and conceptual approaches to experience. With Ti's background as a multimedia artist and an HCI technologist, and Catherine's as a choreographer and performance artist, they engineer medium-agnostic output, joining environments, technology, and the body. Their exploration into privacy began with their performance installation On View, commissioned by SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, Museum of Art, and continues with the Privacy Collection, a durational release of works exploring the tension between privacy and transparency and blockchain technology. For their most recent work, Human Unreadable, they created an on-chain generative choreography method. Operator, the duo of which Dejha is a part, has been awarded the Digital Arts Awards Experiential in 2025, the Savvy Award, the Lumen Prize, ADC Awards, S&T and Arts Prize, and Media Futures. They have spoken at events and institutions, including the University of Cambridge, Christie's Art and Tech Summit, Art Basel, ZKM, Francisco Carolina Museum, Bloomberg Art and Technology, and the MIT Open Doc Lab. Please join me in welcoming Dejha. All right, so where we're going to start is you can see that we have screens on either side, and we're gonna begin with Casey and work back down towards me, and we're gonna ask each artist to talk a little bit about a work in the exhibition that they have, because Casey has multiple, and to give you some insight into their process. It is very important that we ground this panel in the idea that these are made artworks with a high degree of craft. Raise your hand if you've ever picked up a pencil and drawn before. So you know how difficult it is to draw with great facility. Raise your hand if you have ever creatively coded before. Okay, you over-index, which is great, but many have not. So it is important to ground you in the level of craft that each of these artists possess and have applied. So with that, Casey, you tell me when you want me to proceed, and the mic is yours, or the floor is yours.
Yeah, please just go for it. Next. Great. So before I start talking about things around this work, I'd really love for you to look at it for a moment first. Just see if you can clear your mind, observe, what do you see, what kind of emotion or what kind of ideas does that trigger for you? What's happening there? Do you see the movement that's going on? This is an artwork called Century that is about art of the 20th century. Like, my tools as an artist are software. I write code. My work as an artist is very similar to the work of a painter. I'm very focused on making images, producing images within that history. I'm also extremely influenced by kinetic art and by experimental film and abstract animation as well. And so, as an artist, not an art historian, I've spent a lot of my life looking at art and thinking about art. And did you click this one twice to get the video going? I can't see it very well. Now there's movement. Okay. Imagine that it has been moving for a while. You have to click twice to make the video play. And so this work for me is a very special work because it's a work that is a love letter to the art of the 20th century that I have looked at and been inspired by for the last decades of my life. Please go next one. So the idea of infinite images is essential in this particular artwork. If you look at it right now, you can see this is a snapshot into the different states or different possibilities different ways that this work can manifest itself. And what you see in the middle is the original before it's been sliced and then reformed. And then what you see on the outside are just a few of the possibilities. I think Infinite Images is a wonderful title for this exhibition. A lot of the work in the exhibition have this idea. It's not literally infinite images, but it's more possibilities than we can really imagine. You go to the next one. And so this is a series of 1,000 works, and we just looked at one, now we're looking at another. And so it's an infinite possibility of variations, and then within that infinite possibility, 1,000 have been created, and then each one of those 1,000 has an infinite number of other possibilities. And what you're seeing around the outside of the middle are just a few different ways that that work can be explored and the work can be seen. For me, something that's at the foundation of this work is that none of these pictures that you're seeing together are the work. Instead, what the work really is the possibility of all the images that it can produce. And so when you go into the gallery in a little bit, I'm very excited for you to see the work as it's installed, rather than on the screens in the Great Hall. And you can also take that action as well. For somebody who collects this work and brings it into their life, they have the ability to constantly change it and to basically slice it and put it back together in different forms. Okay, next please. As a part of the idea that this work is my love letter to artists of the 20th century, it's primarily inspired by two different artists. The first is Ellsworth Kelly. Ellsworth Kelly is an American artist known for minimal paintings and gestures. There's a really wonderful Ellsworth Kelly in the sculpture garden here at the museum. In the 1950s, when he was in Paris, he started a series of work where he would make paintings of like lines on paper. This is an example of Ellsworth Kelly's work. He would then slice the paper into different pieces and then put it back together in a random order. Randomness or chance operations plays a really strong role in my work, as it does for a lot of other artists who work with code from the 1960s into the present. This idea of getting out of my own biases of what a composition can be by using randomness, by rolling software dice, is really essential to the work. Can you go to the next? And click once more. Yep. So, and this is the other primary artist who's the inspiration for Century. This is a close-up of this is process work. This is a cell phone photo from Storm King, which is a sculpture park in New York, of a George Rickey sculpture. There's a really wonderful George Rickey in the sculpture garden also here at the museum. And like Alexander Calder, George Rickey made a lot of sculpture. There's a Calder in the galleries here as well. They're kinetic artworks that are activated by the air currents, either outside or in the room. And so they have this soft, subtle, really hypnotic motion to them. And it's that kind of motion that I wanted to bring into the Century project. Okay, next. So this is something that I've never shown before to anybody. And the idea of this panel is about process. And so Adam asked you, have anybody ever drawn, anybody ever sketched? And then has anybody ever coded? What I've been doing in my practice in the studio for the last 20 plus years is practicing what I call sketching with code. And sketching with code is getting ideas out of my head and into software very, very quickly. And so about 20 years ago, I co-founded a programming language for artists with my friend and collaborator Ben Fry called Processing, that then later evolved into P5.js. And the idea there was that coding was something made for engineers, made by engineers for other engineers. When you learn to code historically over the decades, you would start by working with numbers, you would work with text. And artists think in systems. Artists are very good at thinking in code, but when they need to do that through the medium of text, the medium of numbers, it's not motivating at all, and sometimes it basically stops that process from happening. So the idea of processing was to making graphics, making pictures, people who are excited about architecture, painting, drawing, and design, to begin making images with code instantly. And so that's what the processing language was made for. And over the decades, it's moved into art academies and universities, and it's oftentimes the first way that visual people touch code and learn how to work with visual systems and generative art. And so what this image is an early code sketch for the Century piece. I would say this is probably a few days of work into it. And if you remember the first images we looked at, they're very different. And so what happens in the process of sketching with code is, like working in the studio, drawing or painting, the work emerges over many days and many weeks through the act of making, producing images, looking at them, thinking about them, and then making changes. It's a very organic, it's a very intuitive process. Even though the medium of code is very fixed and very rigid, intuitively you can find your way through it. And the other thing related to this idea of infinite images is when you look at this, it's not about looking at a single image. I need to look at them in large groups. So this is 100 images produced by the software sort of at one moment, and it allows me to see the system rather than just like one output or one image created by the system. And so I need to see like some of the range of the possibilities. You go next slide. This is where it was a few weeks later. I think you can see here, well, I don't know, I'll ask you, what do you see? Looking at the last one and looking at where you know it's going to be headed, like how can you see it has begun to evolve towards where it eventually ends up? When I look at it, I can see that the element of the circle begins to appear. Something in there that didn't make it into the final is the gradients, sort of the color moving from one to another over space. In the end, I thought a lot of the paintings that I was referencing for this work are super flat. They're like creating space and dimension and composition through the application of flat color. And so that's why the gradients left the project as I continued. If you go one more, Adam. And then this one is maybe 3/4 of the way through the process. And so as I'm working, I'm numbering my sketches. In the end of this project, it was 74. So I started at 1, I made my way through 74 over a few months of work, and 74 is the one that eventually was refined and then became the end artwork. And so we're looking at 100 now. The end total for this one is 1,000 different like instances of the algorithm of the system, and that's a rough window into the process of creating Century. The installation here in Toledo is incredible. This show is hung with such attention to detail. It's really, really extraordinary. So I'm excited for you to experience the piece and the show soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. And it was very important to us as a team to work directly with the artist to make sure that the work was presented in the way that was most consistent with the artist's view of how the work should be displayed. So I think you'll be really amazed by all the displays, including the way you'll get to interact with Century Remix. So before moving on to Sam, just sort of, again, thinking about metaphors here, there are lots of works of art in the Toledo Museum of Art collection, lots of paintings, including some in this gallery, that we could X-ray, and you would allow you to see that hands have moved position or heads have moved position. It is an absolutely normal thing to think that artists rework paintings, or they, a little bit harder with the deletive process like sculpture, they change the way that a particular aspect looks. You can see the reworking process here in real time, well, not in real time, but as Casey went through it, to think about going from 1 to 74 reworkings. And you can see this balance, as you'll see in the exhibition, between chance and control. Total control of a process leading to an infinite range, chance, of outputs, but with a very definite direction and aesthetic sense. That is a common theme that you're going to see, not just in the 3 artists that are presenting up here, but as you move through the exhibition after this panel ends. So thank you, Casey. Next up, we have Sam, who's going to talk to us about one of his work in the show, which is a room installation that you'll see at the very end of the exhibition, Masquerade, and use that as an opportunity to talk more broadly about his process. Sam.
Thanks, Adam. So I've been a painter my whole life, very, very different than Casey over here. I would not raise my hand when speaking about knowing how to code for the bulk of my life. Much of this room, including the Rubens, is what I studied, more academic, more classical training, and I did that most of my life. Started as an oil painter, learned how to paint digitally, became very interested in trying to take the cold, calculated, black obelisk screen that we all use and try to leave my mistakes in it, leave my flaws in it, layers and layers and layers of buildup. And so I have this back catalog of a lot of paintings over a lot of years, and a couple years ago, I hit this point where I was starting to learn about how an artist industrializes, like how they start making larger bodies of work at a scale beyond what one person can do. And most of them have large teams, assistants, interns, those that place a little bit of the work, and they spread out and they become almost a director or manager within their world. And that's beautiful. However, I am not well managed, and I became very curious what would happen as a digital artist if I were to instead think about industrializing as almost cloning myself, making 1,000 of my hands that move exactly where I move and contain all of my past. And what that required is then suddenly learning visual programming, node-based programming, and basically ripping apart my life as a painter, every sketch, every underpainting, every character, creature, object from my world, and training it, understanding it at a brushstroke level, and trying to build a process that was, it followed what I knew. It started with gesture, it built up as I studied and referenced anatomy and honed light and shadow and glazed color in. But instead, I was having a conversation with a machine at various epochs along the way, and that machine was kind of me looking back at myself and trying to pathfind and build these systems. Most of what I discovered is in my attempt to build these efficiencies in my life by making multiple of me, yes, I could make something more at scale, but mostly what I realized is the same impulse to not want to be managed and just be right there in the work while making it at a large scale. I just widened my canvas, but I'm just as much of a little noodler as I was when I was first doing my first sketches. And so if you go to the next slide, this video will walk through everything. You'll begin with a painting I made of my daughter, Sila. And this is the ultrasound of the first time I heard her heartbeat, as well as all of the paintings that I have made over the last few years. And I took a single object from my world that I've made called Mask, and I took this one thing as a test, as an act to sketch, to take it from drawing to sculpture and break it apart to understand its edges and its depth, and slowly try to reverse engineer my life as a painter into almost a file structure, a series of pathfinding systems where one brushstroke contains every brushstroke that I've ever made. And that mask I could do on my own manually, but now I had this replication of myself, so I could actually make many, many masks. And it's a nice tech demo for myself, but most of what it unlocked or enabled for me is I could actually be present with my work, both with the mask as well as with every figure that I've ever made, if I were to not just draw, but sculpt and break apart a painting from foreground to background, more like a diorama than just layers of drawing and paint. And so this manual set of efforts of drawing and painting and sculpture and training on my poetry and my past began to construct a scene inspired by what my last few years of telling this story, building this world has been like, which is starting a fresh family with my wife Rachel and my daughter Sila, having a beautiful cadre of people slowly form around us, and then eventually it gets a little mad the closer they get. It gets a little uncertain what each person in my world wants from me. But if I were to break myself and my own process down deep enough, intricately enough, then I could create also a system of participation where I'm not just getting close to my own work, I am creating a piece that has the energy or exertion that I had put forth, that has all of my past, all of my attempts so far, and see it as less of a still image, even though it is a still image, and more of a gathering space. And so atop this piece, built around life, my life, is all the people that have now collided with me. And I gave them this varnish, if you will, to leave a little dot, a little bit of themselves behind, a tiny written comment, observation inspired by exegesis and midrash, to have a conversation with each other, preserved and encoded on top of the painting as well as underneath it. And the words that people wrote on top of it, all that work that had gone into understanding the mask at the beginning, allowed me in this moment to take their words and create a mask that is not a random number generator, but is actually a reaction to them. I made a painting, they reacted to it, I then reacted to what they wrote, and in a 3-week period of dialogue and discourse, created these masks inspired by every kind of person. So there were people that left behind love letters, the apologies. One man, his sister died very early in her life, and he left a note about what he wished she could have done better. Another father left a note on 2 birds on this tree to his 2 children because he's a little ill and wants to leave something behind for them. Another embedded, encoded the ultrasound of their daughter, and to be totally fair, they're not all sweet and profound. Another carved a dick into the tree. Like, it is the high-low of what being a human is. It's people being a little bit degenerate, talking about gambling, mistakes they've made. It's also people showing what it is to build a family and show love with one another. And so what you'll see when you go into the gallery space is a large light box that kind of feels more like this room. And you'll see a little podium that lets you get closer to it and explore these thousands and thousands of human contributions in the form of written word. And you'll also see the process and the 613 masks that were made for each of the people.
Thank you, Sam. Round of applause for Sam, everyone. So one of the reasons, in addition to the fact that the scale of the work and the figurative nature of the work is resonant in this space, one of the reasons it's quite apposite to talk about Sam's work here is we are directly across from the Crowning of St. Catherine, which is the great Peter Paul Rubens painting in this country. And part of the reason it's the great painting by Peter Paul Rubens in this country is because, having done close technical analysis, we believe that every single brushstroke there is Peter Paul Rubens. And that's quite atypical because Peter Paul Rubens probably had the first great studio production, which is the tradition that Sam was really thinking through. So Sam has an incredible studio. He just has an incredible studio of Sam's, right? And that is what you just saw in that video, is he trained 1,000 versions of himself and ended up with a visual output that is familiar to us, but also very much about his life. And you saw then how he was able to use it to create a sense of community and engage community and allow people to leave this layer of varnish of their humanity. So a really, really fascinating work that looks very different from Casey's and is generative in an entirely different way, but nonetheless using these tools to create fascinating and compelling works. So thank you, Sam. And next, last but certainly not least, we have Dejha of Operator. Dejha, I am your guide. Or you are my guide. Tell me when you would like me to advance.
Happy to be your guide. Next slide, please. And the next one. You have to click twice on all of these because they're all videos, yeah. And then there's a 2-second delay, so it tricks you a little bit. Okay, I want to first take a moment of appreciation because 20 years ago, I was a student in university for multimedia, and we're talking about tools today. We're talking about tools that we've developed as artists to generate our own body of work, but we're also using tools that other artists have created. And 20 years ago, when I was studying, I learned processing, which was created by Casey right here and later developed into P5JS. And so the project that I'm presenting today, Human Unreadable, a large part of that project, though we created our own tool set, we also used at the core P5JS. So it's an incredible honor to be on stage 20 years later after I had been introduced to this tool, and to present such a pivotal artwork in Operator's career that use this tool. So moving forward, so the artwork we're talking about today is Human Unreadable. Could you move to, yes, let's give a clap for it, yeah. Could you go to the next slide? So, could you turn the audio down? Thank you. So the artwork that is on view here in this exhibition is called Human Unreadable. And Human Unreadable is a 3-act generative choreography performance. We began creating this artwork in 2022, and it will end with Act 3 in 2026. Anya and I joke that this is the last time we're going to create an artwork in 3 acts, but we're almost there. Anya is a choreographer and a performance artist, and I'm a HCI technologist and multimedia artist. And so what is similar between both of our practices before we created Operator, which was founded in 2016, so almost 10 years now, is the human body. For me, it was thinking through how the human can remain embodied and be the audience participant to create a work with us as an artist. And also how the human interacts with technology while still remaining within their humanity. So I have a large interest in invisible technology, hiding technology, not focusing on the novelty of technology to create spectacle when creating an artwork, but thinking through, for example, Nam June Paik. He has an artwork that uses really old TVs, and a lot of these TVs are TVs that you cannot conserve at this point unless you have the parts to repair them, which are slowly disappearing from this world. But even though his artwork doesn't use the newest TVs today, it's still an artwork that stands conceptually and continues to be important. And so for that reason, Anya and I created this the rules for operators' rules for art and technology, quote unquote, because we don't like the separatism of art and technology, because it's to put the emphasis too much on where it shouldn't be, right? So we don't call it art and clay or art and paint. It's just art. And so for us, this was a rule set in order to stay true to not using technology as spectacle. And so we always, even though we have presentations that are an hour long where we explain all of the technical systems, we like to say no to tech demos, for example. And so in Human Unreadable, you really see the human body of the core of the work. And for us, the challenge with Human Unreadable was how do we make a long-form, on-chain, generative artwork that still has the human body at the center? So Human Unreadable is entirely made with code and math. And so while it looks organic in some of the imagery, it is, completely, made with code. And in this artwork, there are 3 acts, as I have mentioned. And so the first act was the mint on art blocks. So we used P5JS, and we created a choreographic algorithm which created a dance. So when the collector came to mint the artwork, and this is a collection of 400 pieces, as Casey mentioned, and as you mentioned earlier in the conversation, there is a system. There's a system that creates a particular style. And Brian Eno said something that I love about control. He said, we all seem to value the moment of control, but not the moment of release, not the moment of, taking a step back and letting what happens. The value is in catching the wave if you're surfing, but then not riding the wave. And what I think is interesting about generative art is that we are creating the simple rule set the system where artworks can emerge from that. So even though we don't intentionally create every individual artwork, we intentionally create the system that those artworks are generated from. And so this artwork is a collection of 400 images. And what we did, and generally, for example, in a platform like Artblocks where you release generative art, there is a visual output that is, looks within one aesthetic that the artist defines. But what we did was we created a step before that. So we kind of had the double challenge of having to create a coded system that created not only, hundreds of images of visual art that we were happy with, but also a unique choreographic sequence that hid behind every one of those outputs. So in the 3 phases of Human Unreadable, we have the visual output, which was created by an underlying choreographic dance. So the collector is effectively owning choreography as well. And this is really important because in the history of performing arts and dance, choreography has not been collectible, only through photo and video documentation or notation itself. And what we wanted to do was make choreography into an art object so that the economy of performing arts can begin to build, and collectors could build an interest in performing arts. And so with this project, this was one of our core challenges. So Act 1 is that. Act 2 is the reveal of the underlying choreographic score. If you can go to the next slide, please. And Act 3 is the final live performance of the sequences that were generated by our algorithm. So just because it was created by an algorithm that we coded, all the motion data was stored on chain. We created this process in which that we had to test that the outputs made a dance. It wasn't good enough that a computer made a dance. It still needed to be art. And so in this journey, this 3-act journey, the idea is that in the beginning, the human is obfuscated, right? You don't see the human, but slowly, it's a journey of slowly recovering the human. And so what we end up with in Act 3 is generative art completely out of the screen and experienced in flesh right in front of you, face to face. So that's the journey of Human Unreadable. But right now, we have an exhibition here, and if you can go to the next slide and click one more time so the videos play. What we have here is an exhibition that is demonstrating a project that is developed all in code, but is presenting it in a very physical way. And I think that's really important to present technical projects sometimes in a physical way, because it lowers the barrier to entry in terms of we all have bodies, we can all learn with our senses, getting into our bodies. And so what you see here is a flow chart in the exhibition, which you'll see later today, flow chart of our technical system. You'll see an array of outputs and also the motion data that is stored on chain, and you're invited to embody those dances. We also have performance later today, so you can see in the human flesh what these coded algorithms or coded dances have generated in the human body. So we like to call the X-ray machine, if you could go to the next slide, please. And click twice, yeah. What we want to show you today is the X-ray machine. The X-ray machine, we kind of unofficially call it Act 2.5 of Human Unreadable. We spent the last year developing an X-ray machine. And the concept of the X-ray machine is, first and foremost, it's tied to the visual system and the visual, simple rule set of not only Human Unreadable, but the larger privacy collection within that it sits. And so if you can go to the next slide, please, and click one more time. And while we're here, let's just go to the next slide so I don't have to switch slides again. So the idea with the X-ray machine was to use the materiality of an X-ray that looks below the surface level of all the layers of the human and all the layers of the code in order to reveal what's beneath. And this concept is tied to the overall arching theme of Human Unreadable, which is looking at the tension between privacy and transparency inherent in blockchain technology. And so we had coded an X-ray machine in P5.js, an X-ray machine shader we called it, which takes all of the layers that we developed and then compresses them into one single image. And we thought, we want to show a human unreadable, not just printed. I think generative artworks look wonderful on screens or printed, and there's many different ways you can show a digitally native artwork, but we wanted to interpret this in a different way. We wanted to take the generative art out of the screen and think, how can we display this with no digital technology? And so what we did was we created a system. If you can go to the next slide, please. So here, this looks like a render, but it's actually real footage. It's spinning on one of those things that you put cars on for car commercials, and it spins it. The large X-ray machine that you see in the gallery, it's 500 kilos, so it's quite heavy. But this is one of the smaller ones at Fellowship Gallery in London, and the large one you see is in the collection of HiveMind very recently, as of a few days ago. And what you see here is 6 steel frames. So this structure is made of steel and tempered glass. And there are 15 layers of tempered glass that include engravings and also UV printing and smoked two-way mirror, almost like privacy mirror. And depending on how it's lit, you can see one direction or another. So this sculpture is really meant to be viewed in 360. And there's a slow animation of 8 minutes in which it cycles through different lighting arrangements in order to see hundreds of different blends of a single image. It was also our way to show not just Act 1, the visual output that was minted on art blocks in 2023, but also Act 2, which is the underlying choreographic score and physical representation through stick figure drawings of what that unique dance is. So we wanted to display both Act 1 and Act 2 in a single sculpture. So you can see in the back is the dance, and then in the front, the ever so changing image. So this was a core piece. This is debuted here for the first time. We just finished this large scale sculpture 1 month ago, and so we're happy to have it here, and thank you for having us.
Round of applause for Dejha. And we are thrilled to have it here. Wait until you see it. It is stunning. So 3 remarkably different bodies of work, right? No pun intended. And I think what's so remarkable is the aesthetics are so very different. The processes are so very different. And in that the most recent presentation, you can see how Operator is thinking not just about the generative possibilities of human movement, but the material displays of that movement in very different ways, right? As choreography, right? On the blockchain, as 2D physical object, as 3D physical object. It's a very conceptually rich practice. So it is remarkable. It is not remarkable. It's not surprising. The practices are remarkable. It's not remarkable that we're already at 50 minutes, right? There is a lot to unpack here. So I think what I'm going to do, because we have a tour beginning at 1 o'clock, and there is an opportunity for those who have signed up, you will be on it. For those who haven't, you can plead your way in to hear more from the artist directly. But I want to wind us down with just 2 observations. So the first is that the Toledo Museum of Art is committed, as you can see in this gallery, to integrating media. We have decorative arts, i.e. furniture, underneath the Rubens. We have sculpture next to the Valentin de Bologna and next to the Artemisia, right? This is the story that we have always told at the Toledo Museum of Art. Works on paper, painting, sculpture, integrated. And actually, not every museum does that. That's a legacy of one particular German curator who came over and trained a generation of curators at the Met. And his sort of intellectual progeny went off, and the Toledo Museum of Art was the beneficiary of Wilhelm Bode's approach to installation. So if we are committed to having every medium, including of course glass, then of course we would be equally committed to making sure digital is represented as it becomes an increasingly important part of contemporary artistic practice. So you will see more digital art because the work is remarkable. And I leave you then with this last thought, which is the hallmark of the Toledo Museum of Art display might be collection integration, but the hallmark of the collection is quality. And we as a team, and I personally, have given a great deal of thought to what constitutes quality. And of course, we can unpack all of these things in greater detail over a glass of wine if you would like, but there are three fundamental criteria to what constitute quality. The first is an artwork well made? Craft matters. The second is it of its time? It's the summer, you might find yourself by a lake or by an ocean, and you may very well walk down a boardwalk and see a very well-painted impressionist-looking painting, but it is not terribly important because it is derivative, right? It's not saying anything about its time in the same way those impressionists that we referred to before were very consciously thinking about that style in relation to a broader set of issues in society. So is it well made? Is it of its time? And is it beautiful? And beauty is actually not subjective, but that is the part. We're not going to talk about German aesthetics. We're not going to talk about German aesthetics, right? But as you walk through the show and feel the power of the work, I will leave you with, in this sort of room filled with quite a bit of work commissioned, right, by Catholics or people in the church. I will leave you with Thomas Aquinas's definition of what constitutes an aesthetic experience, i.e. beauty, which is, do you feel what the artist was intending that you feel when you engage with the artwork? Does that emotion that you now have heard these three artists express, is that conveyed to you by the aesthetic experience of that work? And I think you will find in these three instances and throughout the show, the answer is a resounding yes. So we look forward to seeing you in there, but let's give a round of applause for our panelists for sharing their process with us. Thank you all, and enjoy Infinite Images, The Art of Algorithms. It's up through November. Have a great day.